my name is Carrie Morris. I am a certified sex therapist in Greenville, South Carolina. And today we're going to be talking about yucking yums. Don't yuck my yum is something that I think that we've all heard in this community and other communities, ethical non-monogamy communities, kink communities, leather communities, lifestyle communities. And so we are just going to kind of dive in on how to communicate sometimes when maybe things don't align, or people's, labels, or people's, boundaries or rules don't align. So let me go ahead and share my screen here so I can get my presentation up. All right, and again, I'm unable to see the chat when I am in the presentation. However, if you have any questions, just please hit them in the chat. I don't think I'm going to take the full 30 minutes to talk through my presentation, so hopefully we may have some time to get into it today. So don't yuck my yum, how to build a more inclusive, ethical, non-monogamy community. So the first thing that we want to go into is just defining the foundations of ethical non-monogamy when you are in a group like Club Amore, because there's different levels of like guidelines and things. And so kind of the umbrella when you are in, this space, in your community space, is the rules of Club Amore. And so, on the website, in the space that you have, the network, you can read the core values of Club Amore, and they have some really great ones, like respect and positivity, which I think is really important. And, when it comes to, respecting other people and how they live and operate within the community, I think that sets us up for, a really positive experience. And then informed and consensual participation. So, everyone wants to be here, with consent. Everyone, should kind of know what's going on there. They have all of the information, when they are playing or when they are just hanging out, and some of the things I think that comes under informed participation is negotiation of, play scenes, negotiation of relationships, negotiation for relationship structures. And so I think this is a really great core value. It's like, yeah, everyone is going to be here, on their, with consent, with enthusiastic, consent. But also there is this idea that we're also going to be informed, from the other folks here, of, what they would like and what their relationship structures are. And then I think also too, no divisive topics. We all have different, sets of, boundaries for our life. And so there are some topics that get really, can get, really touchy. And so I think that's also a really great one. And please find those. I'm sure you've all read those on the network, but those are really good to kind of go through and remind yourself some of those every now and then. So you have the rules, and then you have your own personal boundaries. And so this is a personal limit or condition that protects your emotional, physical, or relational well-being. So I am responsible for making my own boundaries, and I am responsible for making sure that I am in places where my emotional, physical, or relational well-being is being taken care of. And so, if I have a boundary, of, what's a good boundary? Let's try to think of a kind of a cute one and not so serious. Oh, I got one. I really don't like whipped cream frosting on cakes, right? And so it's like, my personal limit is if I'm having a birthday party, or even if I go to a birthday party and they have the whipped cream frosting, I'm just like, ugh. Now, is that really serious? No. Is it going to mess with I might get a little like sassy if it's whipped cream frosting and not buttercream, but I'm emotionally, physically, or relationally safe. But I might be like, okay, well, if this party is going to have whipped cream frosting, I might not participate in the cake eating. That's my decision. I'm not going to give an ultimatum to the party owner, like, hey, if you don't have buttercream, I'm not coming. And because that's, that would just be a little rough, especially with this. But when you get into some boundaries that are more serious in nature, like, hey, like, I feel blank when this is happening. So if this continues to happen, I am going to have to make a decision for myself. That's totally different than when you say, hey, if you keep doing that, I'm out of here. If you keep doing that, you're losing me. Or if you keep doing that, we can't be friends anymore. That is more of an ultimatum, and that is trying to put some control over the other person. It's not taking responsibility for your own boundaries. And then you have agreements. An agreement is something that all parties choose together. So this is kind of the united front. And it's not something that like one person imposes upon another. So in ethical non-monogamy, a lot of negotiation goes into agreements that couples, thruples, or polycules have in what they want their relationship or their relationship structure to look like. And so, especially if we're in, like a polycule where there's multiple, personalities, multiple people, multiple partners, we really do want to have a solid base of agreements amongst the group, or at least there's, some kind of shared agreements on what this should look like. And that's where we get into the really kind of granular decision-making things that we're going to be kind of talking about in this class tonight. But yeah, an agreement is something that all parties have consented to, and it's always changeable. If you have an agreement, it doesn't mean that it's an agreement in perpetuity, right? You can always come back to the treaty table and create another agreement. Okay, so understanding the yucks and the yums. All right, so what does that really mean? I think, we kind of all heard that and really haven't thought through, or I know, I haven't thought through all of the different, like levels and all of the different ways that this could kind of play out in every situation. And so kind of an umbrella definition is moving through the community and interacting with its members without judgment. This includes kink shaming, ageism, judgment of play styles, body-based exclusion. We can go on and on, like ableism, racism, misogyny, those types of things where there is some exclusion or oppression of someone else's pleasure. And so Don't Yuck My Yum is like, hey, like, you may not like the same things as me, but, I have an expectation that you are going to respect, like what I, do for pleasure. And again, there's always that caveat, as long as it's not oppressing someone else. So I'll kind of expand on that in a second. So judgment versus personal boundaries. So let's okay to go back to what we just learned about personal boundaries. It's okay to have a no, like, I may have a personal boundary with my partner, like, okay, we may only play when we're out of town, like that keeps us safe, maybe we're like politicians or, the mayor or something like that. And so, that is a personal boundary for me and my hypothetical partner. But when I see other people, maybe they are also, members of a community like Greenville, but they choose to play in their town, maybe it's like, oh, well, that's not for me. But I'm not going to look at someone else and be like, oh, you shouldn't do that. People may see you. What if what if, grandma finds out? It's not okay to shame someone's yeses. And what works for you and your partners might not be beneficial for someone else. And I think kind of going down into the next one, common conflicts that you get when there is some of this yucking of yums within a lifestyle community is label policing. And so what is label policing? People really latch on to labels sometimes. And for a lot of people, that label gives them power. So, a really controversial one in ethical non-monogamy kink world is unicorn, right? Like there's we could do a whole class on, the kind of conflicts that arise. One person may feel really disrespected, like a bisexual, pansexual, omnisexual female, may feel really disrespected if someone says, "Oh, you're a unicorn." But then the next person, you can say, "Oh, you're a unicorn," and they're like, "Hell yeah!" Like that's what I'm looking for. That's the dynamic that I really want. And so, like two different people, one label, very different experiences. And what you have to really, think about is the person who takes on this label, it is consensual. They are choosing that label for themselves. And there is no oppression in it. Another example is the word queer. I identify as queer. 20 years ago, 30 years ago, that word was not a good word to, call people in the LGBTQ community. But now, like a lot of us have like taken it back, like, yeah, like I am queer. And because of that, I feel empowered in that label. But, like I could be out somewhere and someone be like, "Oh, you're one of those queers," and I'd be like, "What the hell are you talking about?" And so that feels different for me. So there's a lot of nuance in these labels. And so being careful not to, say like, "Oh, well, I don't like the word queer, so, like, don't call me queer," or, like, "I don't like if this person reclaims that label as a queer person." Really like kind of watch that. And we're going to talk about what happens when you do feel that way in just a minute. So judgment of others' relationship styles or choices. This one a lot comes up in ethical monogamy, especially around the definition of polyamory, the definition of ethical non-monogamy, the definition of swinging, and so a lot of different things kind of come up with those. Some people's idea of polyamory includes no hierarchical relationships. So that means everyone is completely equal in the relationship. Like my partner has partners, and I am not going to, have a hierarchy with my partner or use even like a primary partner term. But there are some people, especially like with clients, like we are kind of exploring polyamory, and this couple may want to have a primary partner or a nesting partner or a hierarchical relationship structure. So how does that work? Well, let's go back to informed consent. So if me and my hypothetical partner want to call ourselves polyamorous, and we want to have a hierarchical relationship structure, we have to give the partners that we're dating the opportunity to have informed consent. So we have to let them know, hey, like we, are polyamorous, but we have a hierarchical relationship structure. Some people might see that as, not great, but that's what we choose. And so our job in that, whether it's hierarchical or non-hierarchical, is to communicate with the person that we want to, become involved with or get to know or date. So again, it's a lot of nuances here that we really have to take into account when we are exploring these different, things that come up in ethical non-monogamy. Of course, too, when you get in a big group, there's always gossiping, cliques, and there could be, some exclusion. Um, I think that that's just human nature. Um, and so just being kind of careful of the information that you're taking in, so if you hear a particular, gossip about maybe a member, like do your own little fact checking. I'll not go to the person and be like, hey, I heard so and so and so and so, but, figure out kind of, what space that gossip is coming from. And, I think that in these, the groups like you have with such amazing community, and you have those rules of, the community of, respect, informed consent, and, what was the other one? Respect. How to go about the other one? Let's just use respect because that's not the best one. With that, positivity. That was the other one. So with that respect and positivity, if you feel like there is something, amiss, definitely reach out to support in your community. So, and then another thing too is some people, conflict is hard. I help people with conflict resolution and relationships for a living, and sometimes, like I'm not the best communicator, so we all have some, areas of growth here. I don't think we ever, perfect conflict resolution. I haven't met anyone yet that has perfected conflict resolution. And so we want to talk about that on the next slide too. So let's get into that. So, that hit a nerve. What now? So, I think, kind of going back to my, queer example earlier, let's just say I'm in the post office and I have rainbow flags, on my water bottle. I guess sometimes I'll have a pin on if I'm out doing something in the community. And let's just say the guy comes up to me and is like, oh, you're one of those queers. I have a choice in that moment. Do I want to respond or do I want to react? And so my initial kind of, my initial feeling is probably I want to react to what he says. I want to, maybe lash out, go into fight, flight, freeze, or fawn response, because I'm going to feel somatically dysregulated when I hear that. So I have to say, all right, do I want to fight this guy, put your dukes up? Do I want to shrink myself down and say oh, I'm not queer, I'm just an ally, do I want to escape and just run out of the post office, don't even drop my packages off? Or do I just freeze in that moment, just wide-eyed and not think of anything to say? And so when you are feeling this type of, being offended, whether it's in that situation where someone is doing something, intentionally maybe to offend you, or if you're just in the community and you hear maybe something else, maybe, you're hearing someone else talk about their relationship structure and you still get one of those feelings. Do I feel like I want to, argue with this person? Do I want to fight them? Do I want to not tell them about my relationship structure? Do I just feel really uncomfortable and want to leave? Or do I just not say anything at all? I think that when we feel that emotional dysregulation, pausing, getting curious about how we're feeling is really helpful. So what am I feeling? Where does this come from? Is this about them or something activated in me? I think in my situation, it is about them and it activates something in me. And so that is a good thing to recognize in that situation, okay, maybe they are just really highly misinformed about, my sexuality. And so that is something that I can take into account. And it also makes me feel, maybe less than or, humiliated that they would kind of come at me like that. And so in the other instance I'm thinking of is let's just say you're at a play party and you hear someone using a label that you may define differently. or they are describing their relationship structure or the way they do ethical non-monogamy, and you don't really agree with it, and so you ask yourself, okay, why am I feeling this way? Where does this come from? Is this really about them? Like they're just kind of talking about their relationship structure, or is something activated in me? Like, is this something that I need to own my reaction to? And then asking yourself, like, I feel uncomfortable. Does that necessarily mean that they're doing something wrong? Right? Because discomfort is an invitation for you to ask these questions. It's not necessarily a demand for you to do anything. And so there's a difference, in the type of discomfort we're talking about. But just because you're uncomfortable doesn't mean that the other person is necessarily doing it the wrong way, because it is so nuanced that, unless there is non-consent or oppression involved, there's not a lot of ways to do it wrong. So what to do instead? So I'm a fan of just feeling your feelings, like sitting in it for a second, making sure you are, gearing up to respond instead of react. And then using some nonviolent communication or language, so like in some instances, it's like, like if we're in a group of our friends and someone says something, it's like, hey, I noticed I got really reactive here. I'm feeling a little dysregulated. It's not you, it's me. Like I'm doing my own work on this. So, I'm going to go like take a time out for a little while. In my post office example, using nonviolent language, like, hey, I feel really sad when you say that to me, like, do you feel, like, and I might just say that, like, hey, like, I feel really sad that you said that to me. I don't appreciate it, and maybe just kind of leave it at that. It's my choice if I want to use nonviolent language or if I want to excuse myself out of the situation because that's a boundary of mine. And so ask yourself, is this a harm or just a preference I don't share? And so I think that's another good one too, is, like, all right, is this a harm to me? If I hear, this other, couple or group, and they are in a relationship structure that is, their choice, it seems like it's all consensual, but I don't share that preference. Is it really harmful to me? Is it really harmful to my existence, or does it just kind of make me uncomfortable? Because not all discomfort is harm, but harm still needs to be addressed. So, like, again, use community norms, which is community rules, or facilitation, like your group leaders here or your supportive community, and call them in when needed if you feel like you are being harmed by someone in the group. And so harm equals a boundary violation, no consensual behavior, discrimination, etc. And so those are the types of things that we're really, like when we feel those, we feel that harm in our body. And so learning the difference between hurt and harm, I talk about this in the kink world, right, with like impact play. How do you know when it's just hurting? How do you know when it's actually harming your body? And so that takes a little bit of practice to get used to, some, research and training. And that's the same way here, and if it's hurting you, that's personal, that's really subjective. If it's harming, that's pretty objective to the whole group, especially in a group like this. All right, how am I doing on time? All right, we're getting there. All right, so again, conflict resolution. I think we kind of already used some of these, but I'll go through them. So listening to understand and not to respond. So again, kind of getting back to our curious stance, like if we're hearing someone and they're saying like, wow, like we, this is the way that we play, or this is the negotiation or agreement that we've come up with. And, like you're kind of offended at that, like, maybe ask them, just really be curious, like maintain eye contact, ask them like, hey, maybe I haven't heard of that before. I don't really understand how that works, like, can you talk to me about it? And so when they do that, you know, like if you're kind of confused, maybe you can say like, okay, like, I think I heard you say that y'all do this, or, you know, I think I heard you say that, you know, like you do this when you play. Like, can you kind of expound on that a little bit more, or can we talk about that, or maybe I have some questions? And then, you know, try to keep your body language open, and then of course validate if you can, you know, like what they're saying, with, you know, like if they're saying something that's not harmful, or, you know, harmful or oppressive, you know, say like, hey, you know, I respect that you folks do it that way. But I still have some questions if you don't mind. And so that's a really good way to have a conversation. And sometimes when you know, listen to understand rather than kind of going straight to that place of, you know, like reacting, you are able to kind of get down into the granular negotiations this couple or throuple or polycule has, and understand like why they made the decisions they have. So own your experience and your emotion using I statements instead of blaming. You know, like if someone does use a label to, you know, like, you know, they give you a label and you don't necessarily live under that label, you know, I feel disappointed when you use that label to describe me. And so it's taking care of your own experience and owning your own emotions. If you are just getting really emotionally dysregulated and you're starting to go into one of those fight, flight, freeze, or fawn responses, take a time out. You know, take a break from the conversation when emotional dysregulation is felt in your body. So when you know, your mouth gets dry, or, you know, your hands start sweaty, or your heart starts racing and you start to get hot, you know, like when you feel that starting to come up, say like, hey, I'm going to take a time out for a few minutes. And generally with timeouts, we want to come back to the conversation after we have done some self-soothing. So self-soothing could be, you know, like taking a walk outside, doing some deep breathing, could be working on a puzzle, anything to kind of get your system back into yourself, like your authentic self, so you can come back and continue the conversation in a way that you actually really want to, and not how your anger wants you to respond or react to that situation. Be clear, kind, and direct. This is such a good one, you know, like being clear, being very kind with what you're saying, and being very direct though. You know, don't rely on assumptions, gossip, or passive aggressive communication. And, you know, what this really looks like is, you know, we always think that we're mind readers, you know, like, you know, we always think that we can kind of tell our partner's thoughts, like, well, I was going to tell you this, but I knew you would respond this way. It's like, you don't actually know that, even though, you know, we really think that we do. And so don't rely on those assumptions. Be very clear and like, hey, I want to tell you this, but I feel worried, you know, that there may be some blaming or there may be some anger. And so how can we create a safe space to have this conversation so we can both feel safe? And, you know, name needs and boundaries in clear terms. So if you do have some boundaries, you know, especially in like kink negotiations or ethical or, you know, placing negotiations, you know, we need those. And I think a lot of folks in this group do have great negotiation skills, especially within a scene. And so taking some of that out, you know, and putting it into relationships, or, you know, just in your life in general, I think is a really good thing to do. I saw a class that another sex therapist was teaching somewhere. I think I saw it on one of my online networks, and it was like teaching the vanilla the art of kink communication. And I'm like, yes, that's so good, right? Because, you know, generally the kink community does have very clear, kind, and direct communication. So use it everywhere. So, you know, celebrating differences and not ranking them. And so respect that different structures and values can coexist. And so, you know, like you may have in your mind that, you know, like ethical non-monogamy is greater than polyamory, that's greater than swinging. Or you can switch it. I think swinging is greater than, you know, polyamory, and it's greater than ethical non-monogamy. whatever those ranks are kind of that you have in your noggin, like try to, figure out, number one, where those ranking systems come from. And then also respect the fact that, different relationship structures can be really wonderful for a group, because, sometimes it's like a yin and yang when you meet people, right? Like when you're doing these negotiations, you have to find some partners or a partner that has the same, kind of difference as you, or the same structure or the same, this kind of alignment of goals or alignment of, what you want to happen in that negotiation. So if everyone had the same, like you might not get, some different type of fun that you might want to experience. And so I think in communities like this, definitely fostering a culture of care for each other, uplifting others, practicing that non-judgmental support, and making space for all sorts of love, identities, expressions, relationship structures can really be a really lush, beautiful community. All right, so questions or comments. So I think we're about at the 30-minute mark, but I can see come out of here, stop sharing, and see what we have in the chat. Let's see. Yeah, compiling questions and give her at the end of the presentation. That would be awesome. I think that's probably what you're doing. Awesome. Let's see. Hey, any questions? Good points here. Yes. So I know Kristen L, you disagree about unicorns. Please say more. Tell me a little bit about what you disagree with, and we can kind of talk about that. I know you can't talk to me, and I can't talk to you directly, but maybe I can expound on that a little bit more. Or if anyone else has any questions too, you can pop them on here. As a former unicorn, can you say more about that? Okay. In the queer community, there is some controversy around people who come into queer spaces and are looking for bisexual or queer women. And so you may have a couple coming into a queer space, like a queer night. They used to have them at, they have them at other Lens Brewing now, or coming into these spaces with kind of this express, they are looking to find a queer woman to have sex with or to join their relationship. And so there is kind of some controversy in that community with what you call like a unicorn hunter. And the reason that there's some controversy around that is because a lot of times when you have, let's just say, just a heterosexual couple, it's this heterosexual couple that is just looking for a female to play. And, like a lot of times, and I'm not saying this happens here, but there has been kind of this historical kind of problem with the couple still having a hierarchical relationship, and then that female that is coming into play doesn't have a lot of agency or a lot of equal, partnership in that relationship. And so that is kind of a term that has a lot of stuff attached to it. However, there are, people who call themselves unicorn hunters, and then there are people who take a lot of empowerment in that label. And this is one example of when you find that, and there is a negotiated power dynamic where the unicorn has, informed consent, and they understand what the couple wants from them. They understand, and the couple understands what the female wants for them. then it's all gravy. It's all consensual. But I think when the power dynamic is not expressly communicated among partners, that's where it gets a little dicey and muddy. And so the main message I get is that unicorns are more like a sex toy than an equal partner. I have had to correct others about me not being a sex toy. Exactly. That's what I'm talking about. Right. So when you have a couple and they are called unicorn hunters, sometimes that is a negative connotation. But again, there are people that, I know some people who they like, to be a unicorn. They go in with informed consent that they are a sex toy. That is what that's the power dynamic they want. They like that, even if we go so far as saying like objectification in those relationships. And so if someone enjoys being called a unicorn, like if you enjoy being called a unicorn and you know exactly what's happening, and the other couple is like, yeah, we're unicorn hunters, let's get this yin and yang of relationships together and have fun, that is perfect. It's when there is a kind of a secrecy or a hiding or yes, we're just using this female or male, as a sex object, or we're not giving them agency in the relationship. We're not asking them what they want in the relationship. There's not an alignment of goals or an alignment of pleasure. That's when it can get really muddy. So, yeah. So, all right. So, yeah. So, let's see. I have zero experience with this. What are some important things I need to learn? Yeah, we do have some other videos. And I will be continuing to do these videos. And so hopefully you can see the ones on the page. And if you have any questions, you could always reach out to me, via email or through the network. Yeah. All right. Yeah, we're done. I kept y'all a little over. But if you have any questions, again, just reach out and let me know. And I will see y'all later. All right. Bye.